ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how.
Hey there, this is Matt Petrowski. Welcome to this video. I'm glad you're here and you want to learn more about FileMaker. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at starting the design process of my new file. This is a continuation of my series. Let's head over to my desktop and take a look at the file. All right, again, thank you for joining me on my desktop. As you can see, we've got a file here, and if you're a subscriber to the magazine, you'll be able to access the file as I put code in so that you can copy that code out. Otherwise, this series, I'm making it available for free so that you can just learn. If you like the convenience, you can subscribe to the magazine and get the code that I put in and so forth. So I've got this project. As I explained, it is a database for building a home, for managing all kinds of different aspects. It's nothing even close right now. And what we're taking a look at is starting the design process. I'm going to walk you through the things that I walk through. So currently, right now, the screen, if I go up from corner to corner, my screen is a 1920 by 1080 currently as I'm recording this. It's just the convenient size for YouTube videos, etc. But many times you're designing based on a specific size. Maybe it's a laptop, maybe it's a desktop with a super large monitor. Whatever it is, there is this thing. Let me switch over to Safari and make a new window here. One of the things that I do is I go in and I'm going to type in golden ratio. Now, the golden ratio is just this thing that's been around for a long time. I will click on images just because this is what I do. It's just so easy. You can always take the time to understand things, but for me, it's easier just to say, for example, copy something. So looking at here, the golden ratio is this perfect ratio or whatever for things. It's gonna seem like sort of cheating actually. I'm click on this article and there is the image right there. If I can click on that, you can see right there that I can maybe copy the image right here in Safari. I could also do a save image as, however you get the image. We're basically just wanting to get this into FileMaker. So I'm going to see if I can copy the image, go right over to FileMaker, go into layout mode and just paste that. Nope, it's actually taking the URL. So I think I'm going to have to do a save as, and I'll save the image as, and it will probably come up with a prompt here, and it's got some funky name, which doesn't matter. I don't need to do it. I've got it in a folder called decrypt, which I've been decrypting some files, but no big deal. I put that there. Over here in FileMaker, I can now go to insert, and I can go to a picture. Right there, you can see that I can insert that picture. And I just want to get to that. Desktop, downloads, I believe is where it is. Decrypt, and there's the image right there. You can see that it's grayed out right now. For some reason, FileMaker does this in some instances where you can select the type, but I know that this will be supported. And what's interesting is FileMaker does still show the insert button even though it's grayed out. So that'll come right in. There we go. So the whole purpose of getting this in, and I don't currently have it cropped down to the dimensions, is basically just to use this golden ratio as the ratio that I would want to use for my particular layout. Now, what that's going to do is it allows me to accommodate for the sidebar, etc. Now, if I started to drag this image, you'll see that it will drag out completely wonky. However, if I hold down the Shift key, it will constrain its proportions. And you can see as I get it right there out to the edge, and I'm not accounting for the distance here between this edge and this edge. It may be different than this edge and this edge. In fact, I can see that the bottom is a little bit larger than it is on the side, but this is just for the purpose of example right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that as my guideline for sizing the layout that I want to use. Now, it's not the absolute dimensions, which I will put in here, but I can see right here at the bottom, my layout is a little bit longer than the golden ratio or the perfect ratio. And again, if you want to look at Wikipedia and look that up, you certainly can. We're going to talk about layout parts, which you can see currently I have a top navigation and the body. Now, we always have to have the body. Let me zoom off so that we can zoom in right there. The body always has to exist if we are showing fields. Well, that's not exactly true. You can show fields in browse mode and not be on a body part. In fact, you can have a layout without a body part, but for the most part, I'm going to say 95% of the time, your layouts are going to have a body part at a minimum, but you don't have to have all of the other parts: top navigation, bottom navigation, sub summaries, leading, title, header, etc. The one part you really will have is a body 95% of the time again. So for right now, I'll explain the advantages when we're planning our design here of using a part versus not using a part. We'll go over that, but I would typically get this size down to this golden ratio. And so in order to do that, I double click on this portal, make it a little bit shorter. Doesn't matter right now. I'll just make it 10, and I'll shrink this one and make it only 4 rows, which will make it shorter. And I'll just push these keywords off right here, make them a little bit shorter. I know that'll make it the size that I need right there. So I could then resize this layout. Now there's a little trick you can do. FileMaker, whenever you have a layout that is longer than your smallest object, there's a little trick that you can go into this area in the first tab in the inspector right here. And when you have something selected, the height right here will become active, such as the body part right there. I select the body part. You can see that it becomes active. What happens is you can enter a super low value, like the value of 1, and what FileMaker will do is it will shrink up to the first place that it hits an object. And we can see right here it's hitting the bottom of that golden ratio, which at this would be 1024 by 678. So that maybe is the golden ratio here, which would be really nice for my layout. Now I can get this off of the screen, or I can just keep it in my file here if I want to use it for other layouts. Again, if it's not too big of an image, which I know this was only a couple 100K, it's no big deal for me to keep this on one layout and use it on other layouts. But for the purpose of this, I now have a layout that's actually at the quasi golden ratio, because remember the margins, I didn't really account for those. Now, when it comes to sizing this for a particular screen, let me hide Safari here. One of the things that I like to do is I like to take into account that people many times will move their window around. And so let's say I was designing for this particular screen size where I would have this up at, let's say, the 0 point, and I want to give it a certain amount of distance. Now, one thing that we know is that the absolute dimensions of my monitor, I can take into account for that, but this bar that we have up at the top does account for some size and some real estate. So let's use FileMaker to determine what might be an ideal size if I wanted over here at 0, if I wanted this to accommodate for, let's say, 80%, and I wanted to find out what the width would be or what the height would be. Now this is going outside of the golden ratio, because if I'm using the monitor isn't at an exact golden ratio depending on the resolution of the monitor that you're using. So we can see that this will get a little bit more oblong or out of skew. So we can use FileMaker. I'm going to go up to the Tools menu, and we're going to use the Data Viewer right here. And the Data Viewer, I'm going to bring that up. We can use information that's already in FileMaker in order to get some dimensions for us if we're using not the golden ratio, but our monitor as the basis for what we want to use. I've done this with when I'm designing for a laptop, and the laptop has a certain dimensions if you're going to deploy, and that's where people are mostly going to be using this. We can click the little plus down here at the bottom, and we can use the get functions. Let's see if I can make this a little bit smaller for us on screen, and I can. So we can use get window. If you start to type in get window, you get all of these different get window content with desktop, height, left mode, etc. Well, these 4 right here, content height, content width, that deals with the FileMaker window itself, and it's only the content. It doesn't account for the status bar up at the top, but the desktop width and the desktop height should return what your monitor is currently set for. So if I double click the desktop width here, we can see that I'm getting 1920, and if I put in a ampersand and then the option or the little pill crow right here, which is FileMaker's return character, you can see if we put in get window desktop height, we can see that it's 1920 by 879. Why is it 1920 by 879 when I go up to my preferences and I go to my display? And yes, I'm in an older version of the Mac. Now, on the Mac here, you can see I'm on a monitor right here. There is a great option, and I love this about the Mac. If you think about, I always have an option. If you hold down the option key when you click certain things, things happen. Just as an experiment, you can see right here, I clicked on scaled, and I clicked normally. I didn't hold the option key, but if I click here again, and then I hold the option key and click on scaled, this is sort of like a hidden tip where you can actually change two different resolutions. You even have these options of show low resolutions where you can get completely different. It will, make the image on screen look really funky, but you can see that my screen actually the current setting is 1920 by 1080. So we go back over to FileMaker. Why is FileMaker giving us this 879? Well, if we do a little bit of math, and I love this little toolbar that I have, it's a Mac application called LaunchBar, and we go 1080 minus that 879, and we get 201. So somewhere, FileMaker is accounting for, oh, I put the content. Gosh, you should have said the whole time, Matt, you're doing the content, get window desktop height. No. There we go. Desktop height. There we go. 1057. I knew it was completely off for some reason, but I knew that we were still going to be able to learn the lesson. So there we go. 1057. Sorry about that. I was using the wrong function. I was using the content, which was the content of the window, not the desktop window. But the desktop height, again, we can see is accounting for a difference. So if you are looking for the amount of space that the OS is using for the menu bar, you can always calculate that because FileMaker is returning its desktop height minus whatever the resolution of the monitor is. So again, if we go back to that nice little tool and we put 1080, which I know is what my monitor is, and I put in 1057, we can see that we get this number of 23. 23 is the number of pixels that are actually being used by this menu bar. And so that's how you can use the math in FileMaker in order to determine certain things. And there's many other things that you can do here as well. So if I wanted to, let's say, put this the resolution of this screen at an 80% ratio, then I could definitely do that on both of these values. I would just simply multiply them. So get the desktop width times 0.8, and then I'll do the same thing here times 0.8. So that more or less, if I wanted the full window to be that ratio of this particular display resolution, 1920 by 1080, I would use 1536 by 840, and I wouldn't use this decimal value. I'd probably go to 846, making it an even value. So let's go to 1536. I'll copy those just in case. And this is what I love. In FileMaker, you can actually use FileMaker in order to get things set to how you want. Let's paste right there. I copied it right from the data viewer, and I'm going to go over to I need to size this out, or size this up. So 1536, I'll just copy that right there. No sense in taking the time to not do that. So if I wanted my layout to be 1536, and then I'm going to copy this one right here of 18. Well, let's just copy that. 1536, my monitor went out to. I will select. Now I would have to account for both the body and the top navigation in order to account for what size I need. So if I know I'm including the top navigation, of course, I have to subtract that 88. So it would be 845 minus, or 846 equals 846 minus 88, which is my current. So 758 is what I would need this to be set for. I select it, go over to my height, 758. So there we go. 758 plus my 88 gives me the 846 value. That would be my monitor. I go into browse mode, and there's a key that you can use. I just know it off the top of my head. It is Command Option Shift, or Command Option, not S, Command Option Z. You can see that what it's doing right there is it's resizing to the absolute boundaries. So if I have this window sized some funky size right there, and on the Mac I do Command Option Z, or Z for those of you in Europe, right there, that's 80% of this screen, or it should be. In terms of the width, it's occupying 80%. In terms of the height, it's occupying 80%. It looks a little bit different, but this would allow the user to maybe move this within their window in order to see what they want to do. So again, all I've done is I've used FileMaker in order to figure out what would be 80% both in height and width of the window for the design of my layout. Okay, so now that I've gotten this to the 80% point, let's do a variation on this. I'm going to go into layout mode, and I'm going to zoom this file out. Many times when you're working on a smaller resolution screen, but you're designing right for about the same size, it's a little bit difficult to work at 100%. Well, we always have the ability to zoom in and zoom out. We can see right here we've got this actual size, zoom in, zoom out. Now you can see that I have assigned some keys to these, which is Command Control. I did this in the operating system. In the Macintosh, you can assign keys to menu options, and I did that because it allows me to zoom in and zoom out, where FileMaker does not natively have these keys assigned. But if I think about that, I've got the minus and the plus. I can zoom out there and make it really small, or zoom in, or just hit that Command Control 0 in order to put me back at 100%. Really nice for being able to design when you're in FileMaker. But if I wanted to use the golden ratio now, based on that 80% width, I can size this out, holding that Shift key again, and it looks like I'm going to be getting a little bit bigger. So because my monitor height does not accommodate the golden ratio, I'm actually, if I want to use the golden ratio and a certain percentage, going to have to use the height instead of the width as my determinant factor, and that might not be a bad thing. If I went to 90% of the height, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll go in here, and let's say for the desktop height, I'm going to use 0.9. That's going to be 951, and I'm going to round down, and I'm going to say, I want this to be 950. So I'm going to do, again, equals, I'm going to do 950 minus the 88 that my top navigation is using. That gives me 862, so my body should be 862. I'll put this on screen, and I make the height 862. So there's my design. Now I'm going to use the golden ratio, size this out, and that's going to give me my width. So I'm going to, if I want to follow the golden ratio, because my monitor is shorter in terms of the vertical than it is in the horizontal, that's what I'm going to use. And I want to use the golden ratio. One of the sides of the golden ratio is going to determine the design of my layout. So let's go back. Actually, I can go zero that again, go to 100%, hit my zoom. And so now the full height of my monitor is, or of my design is being used. You can see that the scroll bar is not turned on because if it was, we would see it right there. We would see the scroll bars become active. But when this is zoomed to its max, I'm occupying the full height of my monitor, but I'm within the golden ratio, allowing me to shift the window to either side. So this has just been some information about how I start the design process of planning the size that I want. The next thing that we're going to talk about is how I decide on the theme that I'm going to use and why. And I'll tell you that all totaled, it doesn't entirely matter, because in a future video, I'll show you a tool that I can use where I can actually change the colors of a theme to be whatever I want. So let's take a look at that. Just before we head over to the theme and making that selection colors, I wanted to show you one other thing. One thing when I am starting to plan the design, or basically just the format, the width and height of my layouts, you want to make sure that you're going to be able to work with the grid. So here on this first area of the inspector, down at the very bottom, there is this area right here where it talks about the grid. And also of note is, if you're going to use the grid, these options of show grid, snap to grid, and the grid settings, the values themselves, major and minor, you do want to set typically on the file before it's hosted, because these are values that are remembered by the file. So if you want to set a new grid value, you're going to want to take the file off of FileMaker server, or take it down from being hosted, then put in the grid settings. I suggest you, depending on how you design, if you always like the snap to grid on, turn it on. Otherwise, you can leave these off, because you can always turn them on. But if they are always on by default and the grid values are wrong, it really doesn't help you, especially if you're using the grid. Now, the key here is when you're going to make these determinations. For example, I didn't want this. I sized it up so that it was the full height of the monitor. I don't really want that. I always like to have a little bit on the bottom of my windows. So I went to a value of something like 862, 864. Well, making sure that the width and height that you choose is divisible, typically by an even value, is very helpful. So as I bring up my little keyboard calculator here, if I go into 862, you're typically going to be dividing based on those numbers that we see in a lot of computing, 8, 16, 24, etc. I just use 16, for example, as my starting point. And what I do is, let's see, 860 was something that I was starting with as my starting point. 860 didn't work, then I would just back this off and go 2, 4, there we go. I hit something where I end up with a whole value in terms of something that is divisible. So if I was thinking 860, make sure that you want to get to something that will divide based on something that works well within computing, which we've got, 8. 8 just happens to be a magic number for things. So with this, I'm going to make this 864 in terms of my overall height, equals 864 minus 88, 776. I select this. There's my magic value. Let's make sure this isn't so big. I wanted to scale that with the shift key. And 776. Okay, I drag this out with the shift key. There it is, 864, 1292. We can look at 1292 equals 1292 divided by, let's say, 16. It doesn't work exactly 8.5, so I might want to shift this by a little bit, let's say, so it won't be, well, again, my margins are off here. 4, 6, there we go, 12, let's do that, 1296. And we will select this, and yeah, there's what we want, 1296. All right, so everything's divisible. It pretty closely follows the golden ratio, and now I would be able to turn on my grid. And when I do that, let's actually zoom that to 100%. There we go. And let's turn on that grid and see what we get. So we'll show the grid. We will snap to grid. Major is going to be my darker lines right here, and minor is going to be my lighter lines. Now, what I typically do and what they do in the print industry, which is where I learned about using grids, is you divide the whole of your layout into how many columns are you going to typically want. And we can see right here, I've got way too many columns, each one of these darker lines representing a column. Let's say I wanted to split this layout into 4 logical columns, or 3 tends to be a really popular one, or 5, 6, what have you. A lot of web design works on columns as well. Well, I'm going to take my total width, which when I don't have anything selected, I can see is 1296. I'll take that 1296, I'll divide it by 3, and that would give me 432. So let's put in 432 and see what happens. 432. So you see what happens there? It actually split the whole of my layout into 3 columns. So I've got one right here. I've got a second right here, and then a third right here. And then I can use the miner within that if I wanted to, in order to split things up and use snap to the grid. Now, in order to get that, what I'm typically using is the distance between objects that I'm going to use. So if I went to 4 columns, I would have taken that 1296 right there equals 1296 divided by 4. That would give me 324. Again, everything breaking up really nicely is very helpful. We have 4 columns now. If I wanted that, my spacing to be based on, again, it's going to be a multiple of something. 324, if I take the 324 and divide that by, let's say I was going to use 16 pixels between each object, or 16 would be my spacing on objects. If I divide that by 16, nope, that one doesn't work. 12 works right there, and that would be a 27 pixel. 10 is going to be way too much. Let's do 20, 22. I don't know. It's just basically a guess. You don't, when it comes to the spacing, you don't have to get this one as precise. 8, that's way too much. 12, let's go ahead and just put in 12 for right now. That gives us our miner right there, where this should be a 27 by 27 box. So if I select this and I go right here and I drag that box out, you can see as I drag, it is exactly 27 by 27. Now that may be a little wide for the spacing between objects. And between objects, I mean like these 2 buttons right here. The space between them I'm going to want to use. But let's see, 27 isn't going to be divisible by 2. So I'd have to find a different number. Again, playing with your values is something that you really want to end up with. Of course, one of the easiest things is just go search Google and look for ideal dimensions within the golden ratio. But again, it always depends on what you're designing for. So there we have everything divided. So let's move on now to how I'm going to choose my theme. When it comes to the theme, I'm going to reset the theme on this particular file. We can always do that here in layout mode right here by setting the theme by clicking on this. It will come up. The way that FileMaker works, if you don't already know, is that each and every layout in FileMaker, your solution, can have a completely different theme. But it completely bypasses the purpose of a theme. We want to have pretty much one theme for the whole solution, because what that then allows us to do is any changes that we make to that one theme cascades to all other layouts that use that one theme. Now, sometimes I've used up to 2 themes, but that's the highest I've ever gone. For the most part, it's usually pick one. Now, the way that FileMaker Themes has worked, I've done a lot of videos about theming over at the magazine website. You end up choosing a default theme, which a default theme will be listed under its own heading, or one of them will be under heading. So we can see Aspire here has all of these, and Aspire Touch has these right here. As soon as you modify one of the default themes, it becomes a custom theme. And for some reason, FileMaker does this oddball thing where it keeps the exact same name, which is what has ended up here on this situation. So if I do a reset to Apex Blue, which came with FileMaker 19, then this will reset and take away any of my custom styles, which I'm fine with right now because we're going to be learning what I do when I theme things and why it's important. I've done a video about that on YouTube. I believe it's called Why You Should Not Use Default Styles. But if you're really wanting to start with the very bare minimum, you can start with minimalist. Now, there's one key thing that you always want to be aware of, not because it can't be fixed. It can be fixed or modified. In fact, if you have an older FileMaker solution, you can switch your theme to a theme where you're able to address the issues that I'm going to show right now. If I go to minimalist and say, okay, on this theme, everything's going to change. And one of the number one things that we are interested in understanding about a theme that FileMaker did not give us the ability to control is as I double click this portal, we can see that the allow vertical scrolling is turned on, that checkbox option right there. But the scroll bar is currently only set to show when scrolling. This is a feature that came on a little bit later, uh, but it used to be always. Now, when we set this to always and the scroll bar comes on, the one thing you cannot change in a theme is the inside of the scroll bar. So this little widget, the up and down, you can't change the color of those arrows, at least not easily, and the width of this bar. You can, if you're willing to hack and modify the theme, which is completely possible, and what I'll be showing in another video with a tool that I have coming out. But for the most part, if you are showing a scroll bar, you're typically picking a theme based on the scroll bar, how it looks, because you will not be able to control that down the road. So if I go to a different theme, let's say, for example, let's go to this Tranquil right here. I don't like that one. Let's go to Enlightened. That one again, maybe it's a little too thin. If you look at Apex Blue, when we change that one, the default, you'll see that the bar is a little bit thicker, and that's because it's made for hybrid to work both on mobile and on desktop. But for the most part, if you're designing purely for desktop, maybe you want a thinner scroll bar. Otherwise, if you're starting with Apex Blue, it has a thicker scroll bar. Now, again, you are able to modify this, but you have to use a tool or be willing to hack into the code yourself and do it, which it can be a little bit, it can be pretty frustrating to do. But you can use the free Base Elements plugin in order to make modifications to a theme. But here we can see that the default Apex Blue, let's say I do want to go with this because I like the fact that the scroll bar for the most part is, it doesn't have the hard line when the scroll bar is showing. I also know that Apex Blue happens to have a particular number of styles that are not available in any of the other themes because I designed Apex Blue, and that is a transparent setting or a default transparent object, which means whatever is behind that object can be seen through a portal. Now, this becomes a very important thing because it does give you a high degree of control. I can drag an object. I can give that object, let's say, a color, which I'll make it a nice red color there. And I will right-click on this object, and I will arrange, and I will send it to the back right there. And so when I send it to the back, you can see that through this scroll bar, I can see straight through it because the scroll bar is transparent. Now, if I was to select the style here of the default, we can see that the default portal is even transparent on this one just because of how Apex Blue was designed. But I will never use the default objects as my objects when I'm designing. And there's a reason behind this. It is because of cascading. So the defaults will typically never be modified by me once I choose a theme, and then I will always tend to save a new style from the default and modify that one style. Why? Because once you change the defaults impact all other styles based off of the defaults. And so, for example, if a default style on this portal, and it really applies more to buttons and fields. In fact, let's select a button that I have over here, a button right there, and we've got the default right there. So the default states, which we have, this hover, pressed, and focused, these three normally do not have anything set on them. Well, it depends on the theme, but normally the normal is the first style that is used. If hover, pressed, and in focus do not have any settings on them, they inherit from the normal. Now, since every other style defaults from the default, if you change the hover, pressed, or in focus on the default, it cascades to all other objects that were based off of the defaults. And all objects are based off of the defaults. So this is why it's never a good idea to modify the defaults. It's much better to simply create and save a new style from the default. A very good thing to do. So that's what I'm looking at when I'm choosing a theme. I've got my ratio. I've got what I'm designing for, whether it's iPad. Of course, It would be a completely different, it would be whatever the dimensions are of the iPad or the iPhone or the whatever mobile you're designing for. But I choose my theme and then I'm ready to go. Now, Apex Blue has a lot of defaults, but if you don't like the blue color, you are able to change the color down the road, again, using a dedicated tool. But I am okay changing some defaults if I want those defaults to now be pervasive throughout the whole of the rest of the solution. So let's take the top navigation as an example. And this is where we get into what I referred to earlier, which is when you are using layout parts in your layout, many times it's easier to use those layout parts because you can set and change their style attributes. Otherwise, what you're doing is, in order to accomplish the same thing, you're adding things to the layout that maybe you don't necessarily need to add for the purposes of color. By that, I mean, if this whole form layout was all based on the body and the body alone, in order for me to have a header part, I might have to drag out a rectangle box, and that rectangle box might have to have a color as a background for me to then put text on top of. Or likewise, I could have just a piece of text, which represents my header. And I'll just type in the word header right there. And we will select that. We will give it a solid color. And we will make it that blue. And then for my text, we will make that text that color right there. We'll get that a little bit bigger. Actually, zoom it up right there. So here's basically the two options that I have. I can make an object and use that in the body part of my layout, or I can select a particular part and give it a color, either styling the default, if I want the default to cascade on something that already does have a setting. So this default, I'm not worried about states. I can change from this light blue color on the default for the top navigation to a different color. Let's say I'm changing the theme to a green theme. I don't want Apex Blue, I want it to be Apex Green. Well, if I click this little button right here and I now save this style and then click this right here to save the theme, remember right now what FileMaker does is FileMaker starts with its default theme that you choose. If I save the changes to the current style, then I'm overriding the settings on the default. My other option would be to save as a new style, what I typically do for all other types of things, unless I know for sure that I want to make a universal change that will cascade down to other objects. Everything inherits from the default, and that's what I will do. So in this case, I could save the change to this particular theme. This goes red. Now I would be able to save the changes to the theme. Now this is the confusing part. All this is going to do is it's simply going to save a copy of the internal Apex Blue and just name it Apex Blue. In fact, in this case, I'm going to do this right now because I'm interested to see. It'll probably call it Apex Blue 1 because I already have a custom theme called Apex Blue in this particular file. Otherwise, I would choose this one and just save as a new theme. So let's go ahead and save that. Let's see what it did when I go to my themes. We go up to the file, we go to manage, we go to themes, and FileMaker actually saved two of them, but it took away, interesting, it doesn't have one of them identified as the defaults. FileMaker always identifies its default objects by the fact that you've got the square brackets on these. So minimalist, tranquil, and enlightened are all default themes. We can see that there are no layouts that are currently using those, but I do have 2 using this Apex Blue and 6 using this Apex Blue. And if we rename this one to whatever we want here, we can say OK, and we say OK. And when I come out here, we can see that this one where the header is green is the Apex Blue mine. And there's 6 other layouts. If I was to go over to the layouts and just choose, let's say, go onto my quotes, that's probably based on the other Apex Blue. And here you can see, just rename the theme. It makes it much easier for you. In order for me to switch this theme to the one that has the green, I would have to click here, and I would switch it to Apex Blue Mine. And as soon as I do, I will lose what this theme currently has, which are my own custom styles, which we're going to be taking a look at in the next video when we take a look at creating our own new styles for things as we go along with our FileMaker solution. So as of right now, what we've learned about picking a size for your design based on whatever the specs are for your situation, choosing the theme and doing it based on the size of the scroll bar and the way that the scroll bar looks, knowing that most everything else we can change, also not using the defaults. And in the next video, what we're going to be getting into is actually setting up our own custom styles as we go along. And I'm doing this more or less on a couple of layouts before the solution starts to become really big. It's much easier to evolve your theme and sort of get some of your initial styles placed in first, then be able to go on and evolve the theme as the file and the solution evolves as well. So I hope this information has been helpful, and as always, I'd like to wish you much luck with your own FileMaker development, and until next time, happy FileMaking.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.